Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome everybody. And what is your school? Gilbert Lincoln Elementary. Is that a great school?
Yes.
Do you have great students there?
Yes.
Do you have great teachers there?
Yes.
All right, you're a good school. Yeah, I am Jimmie Price. I'm one of the Prices, four Prices up there in the village, not far from here. I want to talk to us a little bit today and have you also contribute on the topic, understanding the community, the people, and the land. And that's kind of what your day is about. You've already been to the creek, right? And did you have a great time out there?
Yes.
All right, learn a lot. Hope we learn a lot here as well. And talking about people and land together. Now, I told the other group, I don't want to give a cold, hard lecture. I would like some interaction if I could get it. And ask questions, please. Make comments if you would. And together, I hope we'll all learn. I'll talk a little bit about this community and my past history. And then I'll hear from you. At any time, raise your hand and we'll interact. But I was born in 1940. That's a long time ago. If you do the math, that's 81 years. Still going, thankfully. But I grew up out here in the country. When I was a kid, this was my church. This building was my church that I attended. And my father was a coal miner and farmer. My mother was a home manager, and she worked the farm while my father was underground in the coal mines. We had 6 boys in our family, no girls. My mom always wanted a girl, but everybody was a boy, as it turns out. But anyway, we had a good, happy family working on the farm and around the coal mine. Back in that day, there was little else to do as far as jobs and work except farming and mining and carving stone, like the Hokie stone at Virginia Tech. You know about Hokie stone?
Yeah.
All right. And the men that did the carving of the Hokie stone in years previous, they carved these millstones. Can everybody say millstone?
Millstone.
You know what a millstone does, anybody? It does rotate, you're right. It actually is used to grind grain so that animals can have food and humans can have food. Have you been to Mabry Mill on the Parkway, anybody? Okay. Likely was Mabry's. Yes, in that mill, there are 2 sets of stones larger than this one. This is the one I can carry. I have a couple more that are larger. But this is made out of quartz, and this is obtained at Brush Mountain that you can see as you go back to Blacksburg. And there are quarries there where these were mined out. And it's quartz, and quartz is a very hard substance. In those mills, grinding wheat and corn and such, you needed a hard rock that wouldn't wear down, and the particles wouldn't come off and get in your flour and corn meal. That kind of makes sense, don't it? So they used the quartz. Quartz on the Mohs hardness scale is number 7. Diamond is number 10. So this is really, really hard, 7 to 10 in comparison. But these are little bitty pebbles fused together, I'm told, 350 million years ago. These millstones act as little stone saws. It acts like a saw. If your dad has a saw around the house, a skill saw or something, this is the same principle. Those little pebbles act as saw teeth that shears the grain, turns it into animal feed and flour, cornmeal, and all that. So biscuits don't just come from Hardee's and McDonald's, do they? Biscuits come from farms first and hard-working families, and then it's processed in those mills. Nowadays, steel roller mills turn out the flour and the cornmeal, but in the old days, it was always stone ground. Older people, older than myself, have always told me that stone ground is better because the stones turn slower, the material doesn't heat up, and it doesn't change the taste and the flavor, and it won't taste scorched when you eat it. So they always liked the slower turning millstones. Those were carved out by men at the quarries. I have some photographs up here you can pass by later and see. After this industry closed around 1955, those men went exclusively to Virginia Tech, and by hand they carved out the hokey stones, having already done some of that work. I have some tools with me, stone cutting tools that you can look as you come by. When I was a little boy, about 8 years old, 7 and 8, my brother and I, we'd play out in the yard. There was a millstone quarry about a mile beyond our house on the mountain. And when I was out there playing, I would hear this sound. Well, I was intrigued by that. We all were. And we asked our parents what was going on up on the mountain. There was actually some men up there by hand carving this quartz. Can you imagine how difficult that was? Tough work. My wife's dad, who did this for a living in the 1930s and 40s, he had a little saying about that. He said, when you were beating on that rock was beating on you. And so that means the difficulty of it really came home to him. Okay, any questions to this point? Yes?
How did they make sure that the millstones would fit onto the poles for the ground digging? Did they have like poles?
There was one millstone that lay flat and was fixed in place in the mill, and there was an iron shaft, steel shaft that came up through the middle. The top stone was suspended, did not touch, but almost touched. And when it turned by the water power back then, you'd pour the grain in the center of the top stone as it turned. And there were grooves in there. And the centrifugal force of the stone turning caused the grain to feed outward toward the outside. And as it went out through there, it was ground finer and finer and finer until you had flour or corn meal. So it was done by crude, ingenious machinery, if you think about it. Some really fascinating engineering went into making mills operate and those millstones to be effective. Farming was really the survival occupation for most families here. When I grew up in the 1940s and 50s. There was not many machines about, not many tractors, not many people had cars. We walked most everywhere we went. I walked more than 2 miles to school, and roads were bad, and sometimes we walked across streams on flattened logs called foot logs. We had a 3-room school. My brothers dropped out of school because of the hardships of getting there. They dropped out early in high school. I was the only one out of 6 boys who finished high school. My older brother went into the Navy and couldn't get much work around here. He went in the Navy. He wrote home and begged me to stay in school. He told my mom, said, make sure Jim stays in school because you can't get anywhere in the world without an education. And so he bribed me to stay in school. He sent me gifts and that kind of thing from France and Belgium and everywhere the ship stopped. He'd buy me something and send me a bribe home. So I was able to finish high school, thankfully, and then I attended more than 10 years of night schools after high school. And I count myself being fortunate. So education was not easy to obtain then. There were no grants for college and no student loans back then, honestly. Most people did not go to college at that time. So I feel very fortunate. But my parents worked hard so that I could get that much education. My dad was also a coal miner. He mined coal for 38 years, and coal had its time. Coal had its heyday. Now we have better, cleaner technology. We understand that, wind and solar and so forth. Back in the day, people heated their homes with coal and wood. Coal miners, it was like a working man's Olympics. It was hard work. They worked fast to see how many cars of coal they could load and send to the outside. Some of those mines were a mile deep. My dad had his own small mines, shallow mines, for several years, and we 6 boys worked in the mine with him. There's a monument up there by Fairview Church, just up the road, in a little memorial park. There's over 400 names of miners engraved on that black stone up there, and our names are on it, having mined coal. And well, the importance was that we warmed and lighted a nation and nations at the time, and it served its purpose in that hour. So I've used this as a prop. This is a carbide lamp, actually belonged to my dad, and he used it in the mine, and he stopped mining in the 1970s. And he had black lung disease, by the way, and it gave him a lot of problems. But anyway, this was used by, it burnt carbide and water in here, and carbide produced acetylene gas, and a little tongue of flame came out through that middle of that reflector and lighted their day's work in the mine. Very poor light, but each miner had one on his cap. Hard hat. It was very sacrificial love. I felt really loved by my parents because every day he went in the mine, it was like a soldier in a foxhole, going in there and fighting, literally working and fighting to keep us fed. And so my dad always said, when you heard or felt gravels or pebbles in the mine dropping from overhead onto your hard hat, you better get out of there because bigger rocks were probably coming loose and were about to fall. It was just a more difficult time. Work was done mainly by hand, and women worked really hard in that day. Wives would work around the house. They had a little home economy. Our mothers kept chickens, had eggs. We had a milk cow, and we got milk and butter, and we raised big gardens and raised corn and oats and all that to feed our animals. And so we didn't buy much at town. I only went to Blacksburg usually about twice a year. We lived off the land, and that's why I'm talking about the land and the people in a community. Most people depended on agriculture as their safety net to sustain their lives, and we had a big underground cellar out from the house, kind of like a basement of sorts. It was covered up with earth, and it was cool and dark in there. We had shelves and had those glass canning jars full of good food we raised, fruit trees we had, and we stored our food for the winter. Had a big wooden bin over here for apples and one over here for potatoes, and if it snowed a deep snow, we didn't need to go any place or call anybody. We just went to the cellar and obtained our food. So it was a good life. It was a working type life, and little kids did what little kids could do. We weren't forced to work and beyond our means, or we enjoyed working and feeling we felt like we were big people too, doing little bitty chores around the house. And so we felt proud of that we could help and take part in producing our food. So kids did what kids could do. We studied at night by an oil lamp on the kitchen table. That's how I did my homework. And that's one thing that discouraged my brothers from continuing on in school, the difficulty of doing homework. I have some stones today, various kinds. I have a coal fossil. This area, archaeologists and historians tell us that this region here was once an inland bay, and there was a tropical area at one time. So this imprint in this coal-bearing rock is, my geologist told me, was the imprint of the bark of a palm tree. And so you can look at that later. So I have these things to show you. I have books and photographs. This is a photograph of my father. Henry Price, who was a coal miner 38 years. 38 years. How about that? All right, are there any questions from this group? It was entirely a different way of life, don't you think? Most things by hand. It was hard labor, labor intensive. But my brothers and I had a fun thing we did. Our parents usually had about 2 gardens for vegetables and that kind of thing, cornfields and all that. Had fruit trees all over the place. We'd get a knife and a salt shaker and go to the garden and lie down between the rows so our mom wouldn't see us pillaging all the vegetables. And we snacked on fresh vegetables, actually. Okay, you've been a great group.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. All right.